Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Eddie Wilson with me. Eddie is the CEO of Think Realty. He's a serial entrepreneur. I mean, the guy does just about everything, lots of public speaking. But one thing that really stood out to me as I was researching his story is he likes to focus on three words: time, wealth, and purpose. And so I think as you hear his story and where he's gotten, you'll understand why those are so important. So Eddie, thanks so much for being on today.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
You bet. So growing up as a little one, your grandparents and parents both had jobs, but on the side, they started to do some real estate purchases. So talk a little bit about, just growing up and getting exposed to that as a kid.
Sure. Yeah. My grandparents and my parents both are real estate investors. So as a young kid, my dad decided he was going to start building his own properties. He had this kind of thesis that if he could build duplexes, it'd be far better than owning a rental, a single family rental property. And so he started building duplexes and triplexes and multifamily. And so as a young kid, 10, 11, 12, most of the work I did where I got to earn money was around, the building of these properties or rehabbing properties. I mean, I had a cousin in town just this past week down here in Florida, and all we talked about was, the slave labor that we were, introduced to by, tearing down barns and rehabbing houses at, 6, 7, 8 years old. And so really that was life growing up. I always had a job and always had opportunity because my father always had projects going on that he would be willing to let me go and, clean drywall out of a house or go shovel sand or whatever it was.
Absolutely. Now, seeing that and being a part of that, I always think there's an element of learning work ethic, whether it's from seeing a parent or, a role model, or it's because you got asked to help out.
Right.
Talk a little bit about, learning work ethic as a young individual.
Sure. Yeah. So work ethic was everything in my family. My dad he always was out of the house. He left corporate, more of a corporate kind of a job. He ran heavy equipment for very large companies, built bridges and roadways, stuff like that. He left that to go on an entrepreneurial journey when I was young, kind of going on this, like, I'm going to build all this passive income and all of this through real estate. And so I learned two things through that. Number one, I learned work ethic because my dad always was out of the house early in the morning, usually before it got light out. And if we were going to eat dinner as a family, it was always after dark. My mom wouldn't even put stuff out on the table until dark time because she knew that was the time my dad was coming home.
Yeah.
These were before the days of cell phone where they could say, "Hey, I'm on my way." Like he just showed up after dark sometime.
Yeah.
And so that was just how it was. And if you went and worked with him, that we didn't have a lot, so it wasn't like there was a second car where somebody come pick you up and take you home. If you went to work, you stayed till he was done, like,
Yeah.
not that I worked, all 15 or 16 hours that he did, but, I was there. And
Yeah.
so you just learned that at a young age, that it's like, if you're going to succeed, you put the time in. The second thing I learned, so like I learned work ethic, and that really is a part of who I am. Today I have a lot of companies that I own, a lot of real estate. But I love to work. I mean, it's nothing for me to stay till 6, 7 o'clock at night here in the office. I enjoy it. And I think it's part of the upbringing. The second thing I learned is he failed long before I had to. And I watched it where there were Christmases where we had very, very little, if not nothing. And, and very, very little food, in the cabinets, and my mom worried about food, to a place where we had abundance. For me, I actually don't look back on those time periods and think that's scary. I actually look at it and think, well, my dad always compensated for things with time. So like if he couldn't buy me things, he would give me time. So he'd take me fishing, he would, involve himself in my life. So I look at it, I think he looks back and thinks, I don't ever want to go back there. I look at it today and think, what's the worst that can happen? Like you go back and you spend more time with your kids, like,
Right.
I actually have like a high tolerance for risk because I always think, well, what's the worst that can happen? You go back and you actually just spend more time with family. So I feel like he gave me huge work ethic, but I think he also like really gave me massive courage.
Yeah, I love that perspective. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So as you're growing up, you eventually decide, you know what, hey, it's time to go to college. I'm going to go to the Ohio State University. And although, you know, you had seen the real estate side, what had really piqued your interest was more on the radio broadcast side of things. So
Right.
talk a little bit about, you know, picking Ohio State and then going there for radio and broadcast.
Yeah. So I actually started out at Tennessee Temple University
Okay.
my very first freshman year, and then transferred to a subsidiary school of Ohio State, which is a very specific broadcasting school.
Got it.
That is, under the umbrella of Ohio State. And so broadcast, I was very much, I love this concept of marketing. And I didn't necessarily always want to be on TV or be on air. I actually loved, this idea that you could mass broadcast a message and create influence. So I was actually more interested in the influence side. So went to broadcasting school and graduated and did a stint on TV. I was a sportscaster, did some stuff in small little market in Ohio, Mansfield, Ohio. And then at the end of my kind of college career, I got presented a job in the sales and marketing side of radio, which really is like the vehicle to management there. And they offered me, I think it was almost like 8 times the salary that they offered me to stay on as the on-air guy, So I was like, well, that's definitely the path I'm going to take. Because I really didn't care if I was on air or not. It was just a means to an end for me. So I went down that path of TV and radio, and then television and radio really spurred my career. I had a lot of growth, a lot of success. And then we built a television program that we actually sold to Fox.
Yes.
And so we sold a television show to Fox, and that was my seed capital, really to invest in real estate, and so I was in my 20s, and my dad very much was like adamant about like, okay, don't just go throw this away, as I was doing, but he's like, go buy some asset that's going to yield long term.
Yes. So as that moment in time kind of comes to be, and you've got these funds and you're thinking, yeah, what the heck do I do with this? Right. And dad says, well, buy some real estate. There's a lot of different ways to go into real estate, right? You mentioned, hey, you can build homes, you can buy, rehab, flip them, you can buy and hold, you can do commercial, you can do residential. Talk a little bit about, how you decided to start in a certain area, and, maybe some lessons learned early on. I know you said we got to learn a lot from your dad, but there's always, our own lessons to learn also.
Sure. Yeah, I followed his footsteps. He had built a bunch of like small multifamily. So it was like, duplexes, triplexes, quads. And I went straight into building duplexes in an area of Ohio that my first investments were actually new construction, because he had already kind of paved that path, and I saw the returns. And I, like, if you understand, like in real estate, the Burr method, like you can actually do that with new construction, where you actually get to the end and you refinance all your cash and you end up cash positive and then go do it again. And so that's where I started, but in an area that was really deprived of student housing. So there's a small town in Ohio called Rootstown, Ohio, in Portage County, that has NEO-UConn, the Northeastern Ohio College of Medicine. And basically all the colleges converge, and Youngstown State and Ohio State and Akron and Kent State all kind of send their students there for med school. And that's kind of the 3 years of the graduate portion, the residencies and all of that. So you have very, very serious students, and the housing situation there was an issue. And so I saw a gap, and my father had already built a few there, and he was getting these 3-year med students where they pay, a year's worth of rent up front, or their parents would pay it. They had multiple roommates, and they were very serious students. They weren't partying.
Right.
And so he had found a couple of lots. We bought the lots together, started actually building. So my first real estate investments were actually with my father as a partner. And I think, he did it as a way to just kind of get me jump started, and those were my first investments. The interesting part about it is that I feel like the lessons learned were that I had so many other people, because I had met a lot of real estate investors along the way, especially like people connected to my father, who were very much just like, go buy a house, renovate it, put tenants in it. was that I could go multiple directions, but I liked multiple assets in one single asset. That's why I've gone to heavy into multifamily now. But where you de-risk real estate by having multiple streams of income in the same real estate asset. And so I actually started with duplexes, and it was what I could build on the lots that we had purchased. And then we kind of rinse and repeated. Like, I think we built 5 duplexes, all new construction in about a year or two, had some capital to kind of start with, and then we ran from there. So then it's snowballed after that.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I think about as you talk about, hey, we went to a spot where we saw a need, but it currently wasn't being filled. And I think sometimes people look at that and they say, well, gosh, there's got to be a reason someone else hasn't done it yet. What am I not seeing? And so maybe out of fear of I'm not seeing what someone else saw, they abstain from it. You saw it as, man, I don't know, I've done my due diligence. It seems like a no-brainer. I think we should enter in. So talk a little bit about being willing to step into something that maybe others haven't or wouldn't be willing to.
Yeah, my father had found vacant lots there and was building on vacant lots. I actually bought a couple of houses that were old rundown houses that were about the same cost as buying vacant land. And we tore down those houses and rebuilt duplexes. And so there was these little small, like 8 to 100 to 1,200 square foot houses there that we just tore down. And what I realized is it wasn't that there was risk, it was that there's a tremendous amount of work in that, like to actually go through that whole process, replat the land so that, they're large enough to put duplexes and stuff like that on it. People just weren't willing to put the work in. It wasn't that there was much risk or that I think I thought, well, man, why hasn't anyone done this? I think it was like, I knew why someone hadn't done it. And that's because it took too much work. And there's, the thing is, with real estate, the more effort you're willing to put in, the more reward you'll get. Like, I think that so many people are looking for the silver bullet. I love the book that Anthony Horowitz put out, in his like VC model, where he says like, sometimes, it's not about one silver bullet, it's about 10,000 lead bullets. And that's what real estate is. It's like you win wars by rolling up your sleeves and doing as much volume as you can, because real estate as an asset class, it's a very forgiving asset class. Like if you just have enough time, all wrongs will become right. If you can just pay the bills on it for 2 or 3 years, even if you bought it bad, it's going to correct itself.
Yeah, that's really good. Now, as real estate businesses grow, starting in a single family, a duplex type of a design is very common. And for some people, that's where they will stay. Other people, they're like, well, it's time to scale up and to grow and get bigger projects. So talk a little bit about, what the catalyst was for you to, expand from just that type of real estate into bigger projects.
I look at life similarly in everything I do. And that is, I want my investment to return the greatest amount with the least amount of effort. Now, that might sound different than what I just said. It's not that I'm not willing to put in the effort. It's that if there is a better way, or I can expend less effort, then I'm going to do that. I buy companies. I buy and sell companies. Like my main, Think Realty is like one of the companies under an umbrella that we call Collective Influence. Collective Influence is actually a private equity firm where I buy lots of companies. I bought and would sell a company and would say, wow, this company I could buy or I could build. And instead of waiting for it to yield cash flow for 10 years to get everything out of it that I want, I could actually sell it on a 10 multiple today to someone else who sees value in this business. And so therefore I'll create the value in the business so I could sell it at a 10x multiple or whatever that is. And so I've sold over 100 companies now. I think I'm actually 111 or some crazy number. But the thing is like, what I'm seeing is like, I want to do everything at scale and I'll do it as fast as I can with as little effort. So when you translate that to real estate, it's hard to buy hundreds of single family houses and maintain them and manage them, but it's really not that hard. It's not that much harder than if you've bought 10 houses, single family houses, you already have the capability and probably the cash to buy because of leverage 150 unit multifamily apartment complex. And so for me, it was about scale and it was about efficiency. And so I jumped into multifamily because not just because I like the value add model, but because I actually just wanted to do what I was already doing at scale. So how many duplexes you have to build, to equate to a multifamily deal. So now we're close to 4,000 doors that we're involved with that we own. And, for me, a large portion of those, probably 85% of those are multifamily. Now it takes me all over the place where I'm actually building multifamily on saltwater, a big saltwater lot down in Cape Coral. And it's like a 70 or 80 unit Class A. It's got a little marina in it, a restaurant, coffee shop. It's way bigger, way more grand than anything I saw 2 or 3 years ago. But again, it's like, I just think it's like this natural progression of trying to maximize my output and scale it, versus putting all my effort into something that will never scale any bigger than, what it's currently at.
Absolutely. Now, at some point, a lot of people will decide, hey, my funds are not sufficient enough to grow at the pace that I would like to.
Sure.
Maybe time to get some outside capital. Talk through just that decision-making process and what that looked like for you.
I don't take a lot of outside capital. I've syndicated some deals. And for me, I don't want to be someone who just raises capital and I don't put my own capital in it. I'm in this for the asset, bottom line. And so when I do bring on investors, it's either because my capital is not sufficient to take down a big deal, or my current capital, or I want to let someone in with me because I like the relationship that's going on. We're letting a U.S. congressman in a deal down in South Florida right now because I really just like the relationship. He's a former congressman. And it's like, I like the relationship. And so it's like, I'm willing to share. I don't have a problem sharing, but it's like, but I want something out of sharing. And so I don't borrow a lot of outside capital because it comes with a lot of constraint, I'm okay with the risk I take. I really struggle with taking high risk, even if it's high yield deals with someone else's money, because I always second guess my decision-making process in it. And sometimes I play too conservative. I'm 43 years old, and I'm still able to play a non-conservative game, right? Like I can still take lots of risk, because, knock on wood, I hope I have a lot of years left. You have these varying levels of risk tolerance in bringing on capital. So what I like to do is if I can go get non-institutional commercial capital, I'd rather start there versus somebody's institutional capital. So I have a company that we built called the American Association of Private Lenders, the AAPL. It's one of the largest aggregations of private capital in the world, but it's more institutional commercial capital. So they're willing to lend you non-recourse money on deals that you may have. And, if you, at our conference, you have 600-700 of those type of either high net worths or, institutional lenders that are not, your mortgage brokers. These people are taking it from Wall Street or wherever they're getting it in discretionary funds, and they're lending it primarily into real estate assets. And so if I take capital, I'm typically taking from them. I know what my fixed rate is. I know I can build it into my model for the acquisition or performance of the model. And I typically use that type of capital.
That makes perfect sense. Now, for you, like you mentioned, you're growing, you're scaling, you're building the real estate side of things. And all of a sudden you start realizing, you know what, there are good deals, but maybe not all the deals that I would like. So that's when buying businesses and being a lender starts to come through. So talk a little bit about how you decided, it was time to get into the business purchasing and acquiring side of things, and what you look for when you're purchasing a business.
Yeah. So for me, businesses are what I call my active money. And so that active money is typically a higher yield money. If I go buy a business, it's highly likely I'm going to get that business perform and I'm going to sell it at a 10 or 20x on EBITDA or net profit, right? So I already kind of know it's got a lot faster, bigger growth than real estate does. Real estate is what I call my passive bucket.
Yep.
And so my active money transfers into purchasing passive, real estate. Real estate's a fantastic vehicle for tax savings, right? And so I buy a lot of multifamily. I cost segregate all my multifamily. I get a lot of tax savings because of it. Then my passive income flows into what is my last bucket, which is my giving bucket. And so we have a big, nonprofit organization that we give a ton of capital to. And so it's just this big giant circle. So going back to your question, for real estate moving into the businesses, it's actually different. I actually started in businesses. The business exit provided capital to buy real estate, and I said, "Oh wow, it's way better to actually have capital to buy real estate than to go beg, borrow, steal, leverage, like all the games that people play in the very beginning," which I don't fault them for, but I thought, man, if I could accelerate that. Then as I accelerated, it's like, well, wow, what if I could? So then I sold my second business, which was an advertising agency. And it was like, man, if I could take 10 years worth of profit off the table now, what could I do with that 10 years worth of profit, right? Because, I was selling businesses at a decent multiple. So I took that capital and I did do some real estate deals, but I also went and bought more companies, and so I took that and turned it into a grouping of about 30 companies with another guy. Then we grew that 30 to 86 companies. Then I sold 76 of those companies. And now, I'm back to, I think I've got 16 or 17 or something like that. I forget what I have now. Yeah. But in the end, it's like all of that just translates to more real estate deals. And so I'm not necessarily, I would say that I'm a serial entrepreneur in that I love real estate, but I also love business. And so I just see the business side as a way to expedite more real estate.
So there's a few things to dig into on that. I think one of the first things I wonder about is as you're looking at these businesses and you're entering into it, there are certain indicators that people are looking for, right? Is it they're underperforming? Do I feel like maybe my connections can be a catalyst for growth that they just don't currently have? Sure. Do they need an influx of capital and I could provide that, and that's going to be the thing that could get a multiple? What for you do you kind of focus on or say, hey, here's an area that I really want to dive into because I think this is my big value add that I can 10x this investment, over the next 2, 3, 4 years?
I think if you ask me what I'm actually really great at, it's actually one thing. It's empowering leaders to actually do what they know they're capable of doing, but don't have the tools to get there. I built a program called Empire. It's the Empire Operating System. About 2,000 businesses in the United States operate on my system for essentially unleashing their potential. It's an operating system like, you've heard of maybe Traction or Up. I built one called the Empire Operating System. That system has really 5 phases of business, and it really tells you what to do in which phase you're in, as opposed to like most systems just give you a one size fits all. Got it. So I actually use my Empire system to actually vet these deals to know what the effort or level of effort it's going to take to reperform them. So it's not quite as cut and dry as most private equity firms would. They're like, well, I'm in this type of vertical. I buy between this amount of money and this amount of money. I'm looking for this type of space. The true secret sauce is I'm actually looking for distressed capital businesses or distressed people businesses. I don't want to go fix a bad product or service where there's a bunch of like Google nasty reviews that, you were horrible. You didn't do what I wanted. Like, I don't want all that. What I want is distressed people or distressed capital businesses that actually have decent product or decent services. They just don't know how to get to the next level, because that's where I really excel, is unlocking and unleashing them. When I had the 86 companies, there were actually 86 leaders of those companies. My job was to get them to actually exponentially excel, like not to go down to that business and excel at myself. I can build a business myself, but I can only build so many companies at a time, right. I mean, maybe 1, 2, 3, but at some point you're capped out. Yeah. So I found that my systems tell me which businesses make sense. And then, kind of lastly, I then use that system to reperform it. Now, our typical purchase is between, 1 million and 30 million, let's say, because what I found is another gap. There's big private equity firms up here that buy companies at 100 million plus.
Right.
And they are using big institutional capital. There's $1.1 trillion of $1.1 trillion of liquidity sitting in private equity firms today, just sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah.
They need to buy businesses. However, it's too painful for them to buy a $2 million or a $5 million business. What they need is a $100 million business because they've got billions to lend, right? So I always say it's like the whale. Like there's a whale down here ready to feed, and there's a bunch of minnows available. It's like I feel like I'm kind of that middle fish that's like gobbling up the minnows and then serving myself up to the whale. And that's our model because it's a gap. Like, could I go buy $100 million business? Yes. All my focus and energy would be on that business.
That one business.
Could I go buy 13 to 20 businesses that are 5 to 25, 30 million and then turn them into $100 million companies and sell them? Yes, absolutely. And that's where you have a ready-made buyer. So that's our thesis. That's what we do all the time.
So a question I have on that, everyone has a different leadership style. There's a gazillion books out there, on how to lead or what's the best leadership. And I think, so I played college basketball. One of the things that I always thought about is this: there are some of the most elite sports programs. You think of football, right? Nick Saban down at Alabama, and you just say, Nick Saban doesn't care who the heck's coming into his program. He's not changing the way he coaches for anybody. Nick Saban coaches the same way, and you either want to play for that or you don't, and it either meshes really well or they just don't come.
Correct.
On the flip side, I think a lot of the times in leadership, we can almost take it to the exact opposite way, where we feel like our leadership style has to change for every single person. And there's value in that, right? Because, you do want to care about the people you lead. And at the same token, if you're trying to change your leadership style every time, all of a sudden you can become a really ineffective leader, trying to lead in a way that just isn't you. So for you, you've got a system, but you got 86 companies, which means there's 86 different types of leaders that you're dealing with. And so I guess talk a little bit about, your leadership style and how you found success managing, many different styles of people.
Yeah, I think really it comes down to three things. Number one, what are they driven towards? They have to be driven towards something.
Yeah.
If they feel like they've reached, if they feel like they've hit their ceiling, then there really is very little you can do with them. I don't want to lead people that I have to convince that there's more. I want to lead people who know there's more and they just know how to get there. They're hungry. The second thing is I have to know that their core values match my core values. Like my three core values that we hire, we fire, we buy off of is really honesty, integrity, and passion. Honesty meaning we'll have the hard conversation even if it hurts, right? Like I don't want to ever be afraid of truth. Integrity, doing the right thing when no one's looking. I need somebody who I can count on, who has a level of integrity that they're not just saying something that they're not willing to act on. And lastly, passion. And really, passion goes to what you were saying about work ethic. I grew up in a family where my dad was a very faith-based religious family. My dad would say things like this all the time: Eddie, God will help everybody, but he won't help a lazy man. Like I would be shoveling sand as a kid, and my dad would be like, show me in the Bible one time where God helped the lazy man. He'd be like, God helped, David, God helped this. And he would be like, God didn't help a lazy man. And it's like, that is so ingrained in who I am. I want people who come motivated to do work, want to win every single day. Oftentimes I will not buy a company based on my belief that if I have to rely on the leader that's in the company, they don't align in core value. Now I'll buy that company, remove the leader, and I've got people in my bullpen that fit that, and then it works. I bought a company called Fitcon recently. It's the world's largest fitness convention. In my agreement, the CEO, founder, he knew that he was exiting the business. I kept him on as long as I needed, but he exited. I already had somebody who aligned with my core values, who wanted to crush it in life, who came self-motivated, who understood that space, who had the ability to lead, and then I put him in. For me, those two things are very, very important. And then, lastly, I have to know that they at least are willing to learn new traits. Like, for instance, it's like we typically hire people one of two ways, right? Like, go, hey, I have this job, and do you want it bad enough? Well, then I'll hire you. Either that's kind of one. B, you've done it before, and so I like your experience, so I'll plug you into it. Like, I think that that's the wrong way to hire. I think that's the wrong way to manage leaders. I think, first of all, you have to decide, are they driven towards the end result? Like, is there a drive for it? Like, you played basketball, I played basketball. Like, in the end, it's like, if someone isn't driven towards winning, if they're driven towards having a good time, if they're driven towards self aggrandizement, I got to get my shots, I got to get my rebounds. If they're not driven towards winning, you have an issue, and that's a drive issue, right? And so I have to know what's driving them. Are they driven towards winning? Are they driven towards the end state that we're both on the same page? Secondly, it's culture, right? Like, do we fit? They have the work ethic, they have the honesty, the integrity. Like, will they work in my culture? Because I agree with you. I don't think that leaders truly should adapt or change to every single person. I think you find the way you lead, and then you attract, and then you vocalize it, and then you attract the people that actually are willing to be led by that. There are lots of levels of leadership, right? Like, there are people that'll lead followers. Like, you can lead a follower all day long because there are people that are just predisposed to following.
Yep.
Next level of leadership is kind of like, can you lead actual leaders, right?
Right.
And then there's kind of like this next one, which is like, can you actually lead the people that are unleadable? Like, they're the ones that are like, they're outside of the box. They're almost destructive in their own right. Like, there's like multiple levels of leadership. But the thing is, like, they don't fit into my criteria of 3. I'm actually not willing to lead them. Like, they'll disqualify themselves. It's not about, I see it in reverse, right? Like, it's not, do you deserve to be led? I look at it as like, do you deserve to be led by me versus, and I hope that doesn't sound arrogant, but it's like, versus, do I deserve to have you to lead,
Yeah. Well, and I think, something that I hear when you say that, I think one of the toughest things for people is to delegate. And the reason it's tough is because you don't trust the person you're delegating to, or you don't think they can do it at the same level you could do it at. And what I'm hearing you say is, well, delegation's probably easier for you because I've aligned on these 3 core principles. Right. And as long as we're aligned there, then there's inherent trust that task will get done at the same level that I would have done it myself.
Yeah, or at least 80-85%.
Yeah, right.
I mean, like, in the end, like, high performers hold bars that people can't reach. And part of leading is realizing that most people on their first attempt are not going to do it at 100%. They're going to do it 80-85%. And as long as there's effort and a desire to learn, then I can let somebody operate at 85% because they'll optimize over time.
Yes, absolutely. And they'll probably exceed what you could have done because they have a one-track focus on it, right? That's their singular focus instead of 86 others. So I love it. Well, one thing you talked about was there became a point in time where you had bought a insurance company and taken it from about 40 million to about 500. And to a degree, you had just mentioned, I almost caught myself getting caught up in identifying with the business, right? And having my identity in the business. So talk a little bit about, one, just the neat experience that company was for you, but 2, having that self-realization that, Eddie's bigger than this business, and there's more to Eddie than being a business owner or a business seller. But it's easy to get caught up in the thing that we spend a lot of time on, the thing that we get accolades for.
Yeah. That was an interesting time period where we had exponentially grew this insurance company. And as I would travel the country, I would get recognized as the guy who was growing the insurance company. The reality of it is I never even carried an insurance license, like, I was just the leader and actually didn't even know insurance that well. Like, there were people that were far greater at insurance that actually worked in the business on the day-to-day. And that's a very tough thing. And the thing is if you end up identifying with anything that you're currently accomplishing, you will be stuck and you will be ceilinged at whatever you're currently accomplishing. You might be able to go do more of that, but there's an immediate ceiling. So if your identifier is in things, or your identifier is in, businesses or assets or whatever it is, then all of a sudden you ultimately put a ceiling on yourself. For me, like, what I want to do is I want to get to the end of my life and believe that I removed every ceiling that I possibly could and I reached my full potential.
That's
And
really
if
good.
I ever identify with things, assets, even people, sometimes all I'm doing is putting this like an impending issue at the end of my life where I could not reach my full potential. I was bigger than the insurance company, and I had to learn to tell the story, and I also had to learn to identify with kind of like bigger things. Now, that served me well, because when I sold the insurance company, I don't know that I could have sold it or walked away from it if that was my complete identity, right?
Yeah.
I have a real estate deal I'm in. It's an amazing deal. I got in it 8 to 10 years ago down in Austin, Texas. And I don't mean to kind of like cast disparaging remarks at the operator, but it is his one big asset. And like, for me, I've got 4,000 doors. I'm ready to sell that asset. He's struggling to sell it, not because it just cash flows well, because we have so much equity in this deal. He actually struggling to sell it because it's his identity. It's the one big deal that everybody knows him as. And we talk about it all the time. It's like, but what are you leaving on the table 2 years down the road because you refuse to pull your identity out of this asset?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's so big. And, earlier you talked a little bit about faith life. And I think, at the end of the day, it's so easy for us to identify the most closely with what we are, right? Whether that's a parent or it's your career, I mean, it's easy to get caught up in that, but those things are fleeting, right? Those things can go away. And so when you tie yourself to it, that can lead to a very slippery slope depending on how life unfolds, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that our people, to be a great leader, we have to identify with something greater than ourselves, and something so great that other people can follow it. It's like, for me, that I'm sitting in my private equity firm today, and there's a ton of employees walking around. We got multiple assets. And my vision and my identity have to be so much greater so that they can find their place in it, if mine is limited. And so, faith resounds with me in such, deep ways, because my faith is in something that's greater than me. It's easy for me to talk about it. I'm not ashamed of it, because it's like, when I can kind of say, well, I'm not my own, I didn't create this, I was given this opportunity, then it really like resists and rejects that notion that I somehow created this life I have, or I've somehow arrived, or my identity is in something that surrounds me.
Yes, I love that. Now, inside of buying businesses, the goal is always to, have an exit and have it be a multiple, but that isn't always the case. So,
Sure.
As you reflect on one or two, deals that I'm not going to say they didn't work out, but just maybe didn't work out the way you would have liked, what is
Sure.
one or two lessons that you took away that then allowed you to either not make that mistake again, or make it fewer times
Yeah.
than you otherwise would have?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, I'd gladly give you my mistakes, for sure. Because I think that in those mistakes, there's so much more learning than in those deals that you put together that everybody looks at and they think, you did something amazing.
Yeah.
Right during the end of last year, we have a company called Fitcon, Fitness Convention, and we were looking for vertically integrated assets. So like supplement companies, clothing companies that would align with all the data, so we could turn the lifetime value of the Fitcon audience into more lifetime value with other products and services.
Yeah.
We were introduced to a group that was a hormone replacement therapy and clinics, where people that struggled with, both male and female, they struggled with like hormone deficiencies that you'd kind of solve it. And in the workout kind of physical community, like that's a big issue.
Yeah.
And so we felt like that was a space we wanted to get into. And we went through due diligence, bought a company, and we get to the point where We're ready to redeploy. We're rebranding, we're ready to redeploy, we're ready to go out. We broadened our kind of base. It was very male driven. We were going like we broadened the audience out. And we get a call from our the one doctor on staff, and he said, "Hey, just want to let you know, our license expired, and you're probably looking at probably a couple $100,000 to get it renewed, but also we're gonna have to have a doctor's network." And we were like, "Wait, hold on a second, what?" And he was like, yeah. He goes, "The COVID waiver expired." And we were like, "What COVID waiver?" And he was like, "Oh, you didn't know about the COVID waiver?" And we're like, "No." He's like, "Oh, that allowed us to practice in 50 states through telehealth in controlled substances, which any type of therapy like that as a controlled substance, you need a prescription." He was like, "So yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to," and it was like this moment of like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me." We'd already bought it, we already reinvested everything, and then we were non-compliant and couldn't practice, and so it was one of those ones where we actually looked at it and we were like, you know what, like this doesn't make sense to double down on. Like we like it, there's a lot of competitors in the space, and so we actually just went and partnered with a competitor to do a joint venture deal, and we actually shut that company down and cut our losses, right?
Yeah.
The lesson learned is not do better due diligence. Like I just don't know that any of our staff, even the doctor that we had helping us due diligence, would have ever caught that one little singular thing. It was just one of those things.
Yeah.
But I think the lesson learned, and so many times I've learned this lesson, is that you have to be nimble and you have to be willing to let go of things that just don't work as planned. Most people get so caught up in what's going on that's negative that they focus all their energy on trying to correct the negative. Well, so what happened out of that, and here's where the lesson comes in us exploring all of that, we meet a guy named Dr. Jim Laval. Dr. Jim Laval owns a company called Metabolic Code. The Metabolic Code is actually a way better system of testing the body and getting into gut health and blood health and all of these different things, and understanding the body from a holistic perspective, so that you're not just prescribing hormone replacement, you're actually getting to the root of the problem. And he had a very proprietary way to do it that in our estimation is like untouched by anyone else. And we were like, wow, this has a more altruistic side to it, a holistic side. We'd love to do this versus just prescribing, hormone replacement. And so, being nimble enough to just walk away, cut our losses, and say, you know what, that was the lesson learned, led to actually what's now a much better opportunity that actually serves our community better and something that we feel really good about. So I think a lot of it is like not holding on to those things when it just feels like the whole world is crumbling. It's like sometimes you just gotta go through life with your hands open and go, I didn't create it, the opportunity, I'll do my best with it. And I'm going to move on and try to find a new opportunity tomorrow.
Absolutely. Well, along those same lines of, hey, I didn't create it. Everything that I have has been given to me, right? You decided, hey, you know what? I'd really like to do some strong work in the nonprofit sector, and you started the nonprofit Impact Others. So talk a little bit about the mission that you have there and the phenomenal work you guys are doing.
Thank you. Yeah. So we have two foundations organizations and one is international broadcasting. So we do a lot of international broadcast education, but Impact Others is our second one. And Impact Others is about humanitarian good around the world. So we really have 4 pillars. The first pillar is feeding centers and orphanages. And so the feeding centers they're separated, but the feeding centers and the education centers are where we're bringing malnourished children, undereducated communities, and providing them, opportunities that they never would have, both on the nourishment side, but also like mental nourishment, right? Like to get them to a place where they can succeed in life because they have at least basic skills in education. The second one would be orphanages. Then it goes deeper, right? So then some of these kids have no support system. And so we go all the way down to housing them. The third one is clean water. What we started off in feeding children, and what we found is but then there were some that even though you fed them, they had no place to live. They were still living on the street. So then we went to orphanages. And then as we kept getting deeper and deeper into this, it was and so many issues of malnourishment comes down to they don't have clean water to drink. And so Then we got into like wells. And so we're digging, I think, 7 wells this month just in Ghana, West Africa, and 2 in Trichy, India. And then the fourth thing is building sustainable businesses, which is where my passion is. And so in those communities, as opposed to doing like micro loans where you say, okay, I'm going to give you a loan of $5,000 and over the next 20 years, you got to pay me back $50 a month or whatever. What we actually do is extend a loan that is repayable over time to the actual nonprofit organization that exists in that country. So we've started water buffalo farms and woodworking plants in Laos, and a taxi company in Ghana, and a sewing company in Nigeria. And it just goes down. But in the end, it's like their contributions actually going to that organization to continue to sustain the orphanages, the feeding centers, the water projects. And it's kind of that concept of teaching them to fish. And so we've actually had so many of them that have actually expired past the point of repayment, and they just continue to give. They love it. It's a part of who they are. And so, for us, it just exponentially increases our output by building these businesses. And we put empire on those businesses so they operate properly. And it's just a really great thing. We feed over 4,000, maybe 4,200 kids a day right now. We house quite a few of those, and we'll do probably 30 well projects this year.
Wow.
And we'll build probably close to 8 to 10 businesses this year. So it's a blast. It's where I live. I love living my life. And as an organization, Collective Influence, our private equity firm, we give a ton of our profit to that. And then we extend opportunities for others if they want to join or be a part of the project.
Well, like I kicked off with, time, wealth, and purpose. You are definitely maximizing those for yourself and for others. And that's, a neat thing to be able to do all that, to live a life that's been great for yourself, but also to help others live their best life too. So, Eddie, any other highlights or moments that really stick out to you as you reflect on, what's gotten you to where you're at today that you want to make sure we highlight?
No, other than just going back and reiterating the time, wealth, and purpose. If you are a person who is struggling in life, you're listening to this podcast, the first thing you do is you don't worry about your wealth, you worry about managing your time, right? Like, time is everything. If you don't control your time, then you'll never generate wealth. Once you generate wealth, then the purpose piece can come into play. I've heard
Don't know what happened. Good to go, though.
You're good. Very good. You want me to just go ahead and reiterate that then?
Yep. Time, wealth, and purpose. That's perfect.
Okay. It's still lagging a little bit.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Let's see. You can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So just the last thing is that, I live by those 3 things: time, wealth, purpose. If you're struggling in life, like, you need to, number one, start with managing your time properly. You can't ever get to a place of fulfilling your purpose if you don't first manage your time. Time is your greatest asset. We need to spend more time managing our time than managing our money. And if you can manage your time correctly, you'll actually begin to generate more wealth. Wealth is not about having abundance of money. Wealth is about having enough to cover my needs and the ability to impact others. And so if you can cover your own needs and you can also impact and give and create for others, that's true wealth. And then wealth lived out correctly then starts feeding into your purpose. I don't know what your purpose is. I know what my purpose is, and my purpose is impact others and what we're doing there. So I'm back in that loop again. Like, I still understand that the better I manage my time, the better I manage, it will create more wealth. The more I manage my wealth, the more I will actually live out my purpose. And so, for those that are listening, it's like, I learned that because of my father. Like, my father would just instill it into me all the time. It's a testament to who he is. Now, he doesn't do anything like me. He actually operates his own businesses. He does things, radically different than I do. But that impact. And the thing is like, that really didn't come into play until I was about 24 years old. I was really successful. and really, really depressed. And I went and sat with my dad one night, finally decided maybe he actually knows what he's talking about. It took me from, 15 years old to 24 to realize that. But sat down with him, and he began to explain some of these things to me, like the reason I taught you this, the reason you went through this, the reason, and it put so much of it together for me. And just being willing to sit down and listen really changed the trajectory of my life. Then I got my priorities in order, started managing my time properly, started generating the wealth that I was capable of. And then now that wealth is translated into helping others.
I love it. Well, Eddie, I appreciate you sharing your story and your journey, my man. I'm excited to continue to watch everything you're doing, and we'll probably have to do this in another 2 or 3 years, and highlight all the new moments that have led to the new businesses and the additional growth.
Yes, sir. Well, I enjoyed being on the show.